So once again, I'm Benjamin Paloff, Director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies here at the University of Michigan, and it has been a delightful and frankly, for me, restorative day, talking about the kinds of things that as I sometimes like to say, got me into this mess. My enthusiasm for this literature, for these cultures, and it's been really wonderful to hear that enthusiasm shared, and to be able to invite guests both in person and virtually. So our last event of the day is a poetry reading, a reading of poetry in translation by one of our most acclaimed literary translators. And that's saying quite a bit. Of course, we've heard from a number of acclaimed literary translators throughout the day. But we thought in organizing today's events that it was perhaps not just typical, but in some ways a waste, that whenever a great translator scholar is asked to speak on a university campus, it's almost inevitably to speak on scholarship, or at the very least to speak on something having to do with literary translation theory. But in this case, we have specifically asked Clare Cavanagh to join us as a reader of poetry, as someone who shares their art and their craft with us. Clare Cavanagh is a literary critic, a professor of Slavic literature, and a highly acclaimed, decorated literary translator. She is a professor in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures, and I believe currently the chair, at Northwestern University. No longer the chair, sorry, no longer the chair at Northwestern University Press. No good deed goes unpunished. Before that, she was at, for many years at the University of Wisconsin, so there's a kind of double upper Midwestern connection. She has received a great many awards and honors for her translations as well as for her work as a scholar. I will name just a few of these. Her most recent work of scholarship, Lyric Poetry and Modern Politics, Russia, Poland, and the West, received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism, which is an exceptional honor for a scholarly text. It also received the William Riley Parker Prize of the Modern Language Association, the Atziel Prize for Outstanding Scholarly Book in Slavic Literature, the Ilchester Lecture in Slavonic Literatures, Oxford University, et cetera, et cetera. These are all among Professor Cavanagh's honors. Her translation of the selected poems of the Nobel Prize-winning poet Wisława Szymborska, which she had done in collaboration with Stanisław Baranczak, received the PEN Book of the Month Prize for Outstanding Literary Translation in, I'm going to say 1994, but I might get that about wrong. Hey, I got it right. Excellent. She has published very widely in the Times Literary Supplement, the New York Times Book Review, the New Republic, the New Yorker, New York Review of Books, Partisan Review, Common Knowledge, many, many other places. She is, as I mentioned, the translator of Wisława Szymborska, as is Joanna Trzeciak, I should point out. She is also notably the primary translator into English of the Polish poet Adam Zagajewski, who died just recently. So I'm very much looking forward to this reading and have been kind of for a very long time. And please join me in welcoming Clare Cavanagh.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for organizing this. And now I'm going to use my papers to cover up the picture that's reflecting back from the thing here. I changed all my plans about the reading in the light of what's happened in recent months, and so it's a bit diffuse, but I wanted to get in a few different strands of what I've done, but also just to say that the whole conference, I mean, it's been a wonderful conference. First conference I've been to since October 2019. And the reason I came is because it was para-academic. Exactly, because this is the stuff that really, floats my boat. And I was delighted, especially with Ben at the helm here. And one other thing that just a couple of things about the memory lane side of stuff. I never thought of myself as a Midwestern translator until this conference. I always think of myself as a Californian in exile, and you kind of never stop being one of those. So I don't even want to call myself a former Californian. I'll just call myself someone who can't afford California. But most of my translating career has in fact been in the Midwest, practically all of it. And I stole one thing. This is Ben's copy. I stole it off the table there. This was the book that Stanisław Baranczak and I published in 1991 when I was at Wisconsin with Northwestern University Press, and the person who acquired it for us was Susan Harris. I was so happy to hear someone mention that, who is one of my best friends, and starting from this book, she's been one of my best friends for a really long time now. And the things that people have been bringing up, I'll get to the poems in just a minute here, but the things people have been bringing up, I was telling Ben, I did my study abroad in Leningrad, not Petersburg, in 1977. This is, my undergrads think like I come from the early Cretaceous period, I just say. And then I had a year of Polish and then went to summer school in Krakow in 1981 when we were waiting to see if there was going to be a Russian invasion during the Solidarity period. So that was pretty amazing. Then that was right after I was forcibly hijacked into a quote-unquote second Slavic language by my department. Praise the Lord. So graduate students, be grateful for your requirements. Before Stanisław Baranczak even came to Harvard, but I was just picking, it was, 1980, I was thinking, oh, there's Wałęsa, there's Miłosz, there's the Pope, and this guy Baranczak is supposed to come, this famous dissident, what the hell, Polish. And then he did come, and he got stuck there as a result of martial law. So all of the stuff people are talking about not being able to publish or having to smuggle things out surreptitiously through various, I kind of feel like I didn't exactly live it firsthand, but they were my best friends in Cambridge when I was still there, and I kind of learned about it firsthand without even quite knowing what I was learning about. I also learned about literary prejudices, and I was thinking of Joanna with this because Stanisław didn't like Różewicz because I think Różewicz wrote something critical of him. One thing I learned, Osip Mandelstam said that that going to the house of his teacher, I've forgotten his first name, Ivanov, when he was he learned that, thank you, that literature is a long family quarrel. And I got stuck in the middle of the quarrel. And I kind of loved Różewicz, but Stanisław, so he's not even in here. So thank heavens that somebody saved Różewicz for the English language. Anyhow, so I started translating when I was a graduate student, and this is again some of the people that we're talking here. Oh, my final episode, my one Cold War stint as a Cold Warrior. I actually worked at Radio Free Europe as an intern in 1982 on the underground Polish documents that were coming out of Poland being broadcast back to Poland. So all of this stuff is like part of my history. I have 3 little samizdat editions of Polish literature I picked up in 1981. Gombrowicz's Transatlantic. I have a little tiny, they're printed on something that's like construction paper, stapled together and run off on mimeographs. I have Transatlantic. I have Miłosz's Hymn on the Pearl, and I have Adam Zagajewski from 1979 that somebody gave me when I was over there. So all of these things have just been things I've literally kind of grown up with. And then Baranczak, and I was his research assistant. He was trying to translate into English, hadn't done it very much yet. And he got me going on the Ryszard Krynicki. That's the first poet we translated. I'll get to a couple poems there in a minute of Ryszard's. And I kept saying, oh my God, I can't do this. I've had 1 year and 1 summer of Polish, I can't. And he said something, and this is something, graduate students, you should think of this too, that's like my little mantra I carry around, but he said, why not? So everyone in graduate school tells you, he said, why not? And that's how we got hooked. Anyhow, so I'll turn back to a couple translations of Baranczak's poetry, and to Ryszard Klinicki's poetry, and I'll end and do a few poems from my current work in progress, which is a translation project of Mironbiawski. If you don't know him, my shorthand version of Mironbiawski is if Emily Dickinson and Ogden Nash had a love child in interwar Poland, that would have been Mironbiawski. I'm translating him. I started translating him, and our publications came out in cross currents, actually, with Baranczak, who wrote his dissertation on Białaszewski. And then Białaszewski's literary editor hated Baranczak. This is what I meant. You just go over there. Everybody hates somebody I work with. I'm always in the middle of some argument. Whether it's they can't stand the poetry, or they're all communists, or they're all not communists, or just thank God my last name is Cavanagh. I'm not in the fight. So we were translating Białaszewski, and I have to poke around some more to find our old translations, but I've returned to it with my friend Michał Rusinek, who runs the Szymborska Foundation and is a great writer of light verse and loves rhymes and knows songs from 1960s American cartoons, which is one of the things that originally won my heart. So he and I are working on them. So I'll give you a little Białaszewski, but all of this kind of goes back to Baranczak. So that's the through line here. Anyhow, I'm going to start with a poem that I've been thinking about. I always think about a lot. Adam died, as Benjamin mentioned, just about exactly a year ago. And I've been translating him for 26 years, and we've been friends for 26 years, and I haven't gotten over it. I won't. Anyhow, this is his most famous poem, but I read it at the beginning. I teach a course called What is Lyric Poetry? None of the technology at Northwestern was working. I couldn't get my screens to pull up. I couldn't get my extremely ugly PowerPoints up. I couldn't get anything up. So what I did with the students, it was close to the anniversary of September 11th. So I just read this poem to them twice. I just read it out loud. We were thinking about events then. It reads even differently now, and I'll talk about that in a minute after I've read it. This is Try to Praise the Mutilated World, which came out on the last page of The New Yorker in the first issue after 9/11. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of rosé wine. The nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world and the gray feather a thrush lost and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. Well, it came out for 9/11, but that's not what it was written about. It was written a couple years before that. And because I got it, I think he was sending me poems by fax at that time. Then we switched to email later. And I got a blurry fax of this poem, and I translated it before the event. It was coming out in his next volume in English, and made a mistake. This is one thing any budding translator should know. I thought that my mistake made it on the back cover of the New Yorker. I thought they're going to revoke my translator's license. This is it. Every translator I've ever talked to has made mistakes that excruciate them for decades to come, and nobody else really cares. It's true, and Adam caught the mistake. I had to chew him out. This is about certain kinds of relationships between poet and translator. He caught the mistake. I said drops of wine, the dew, because it was kropli wina rosé. Rosé is English. So, of course, I thought it had to be Polish, because that would have been too easy. And I thought it was orosia. It was blurred. I translated into Polish, dew, and then put it in the prepositional case. So I made things as hard as I could, and it was wrong. He caught it, and he didn't tell me. He said afterwards, first I thought it was strange, but then what is this, a picnic at dawn? But then I kind of liked it. I'm like, Adam, you can't kind of like my mistakes. You have to just kind of tell me and I'll fix it, but you can't just kind of like them. So anyhow, this is one of the very few poems we had arguments about different phrases in here. Usually I was kind of yesterday's papers, he was on to the next poem. And anyhow, the poem wasn't written about 9/11 at all. It resonates for me even differently now. You know, we've been talking about reception and things coming out in different contexts and how they may or may not be read. It doesn't say anything about 9/11 either. I only found out long after I'd translated it that it was about him going back to his hometown, Lviv, where he was born and deported immediately after his birth in the wake of World War II and the redivision of nations. So now the poem, what he was looking at is destruction in the wake of the Soviet era, when he could finally go back and see the legendary city of Lviv. Afterwards, the abandoned homesteads, he was thinking about the history that informed that landscape and took that landscape out, and then that landscape turned into a landscape somehow strangely recognizable across the ocean. And now, when I read it again, to me it's Lviv again. It's no longer a 9/11 poem, it's a Lviv poem. I'm going to read a few poems, though. Stanisław is incredibly hard to translate. And again, I was thinking about various points people made, who he translated and what he was smuggling when he translated things. He was translating the Metaphysicals when he was a dissident poet in Poland who couldn't publish, and even had published under various pseudonyms and so forth then. How did the Metaphysicals, that's, Brodsky did it too. Somehow you're in this repressive environment, you can't publish, and you turn to something radically different. I'm not even going to try and figure it out now. But this is a poem that Stanisław wrote when he was still in People's Poland. And I don't even remember, to be honest, if I translated this with him, if I translated it on my own. I forgot to write it down. I don't remember. It's called If China, Then Just the Kind. If China, then just the kind you won't miss under movers' shoes or tanks. If an armchair, then not too cozy, so that getting up and going won't upset you. If clothes, then just what fits into one suitcase. If books, then only those you know by heart. If plans, then just the kind you can forget when it comes time for your next move to a new street, continent, era, or world. Who said that you could settle in? Who said that some things last forever? Didn't anybody say that never in this world will you ever really feel at home? And I'll read one more poem by Stanisław, or two more actually. This is double-sided and I'm a bit confused. My printer decided to die right as I was trying to prepare my materials. Don't they all? In any case, these are a few poems, Villanelles. The Villanelle, as far as I know, wasn't a form that existed in Polish before Stanisław wrote them. And I remember looking at the reception of these poems after these were written after 1991, in the 90s when he was still writing before illness made it impossible. And he took the Villanelle form, wrote these poems, and I remember the Polish reception saying, That's amazing. He's invented a completely new literary form. It's another thing about the translation of forms across. This is one called That Mozart Aria. That Mozart aria up there, which floor? 10? Which window? 16th from the left? Empires were tumbling down and rising up again. That non so più, that lucid lion's den, that frail fortress's flight, that friendly fire, that anapestic pulsing from floor 10 had to be heard precisely there and then, claiming its makeshift right not to expire, though empires were rising up again, and our consent was mixed with their cement. One Mozart tape may still salve the entire globe's pain if played in time on some floor 10, as if that long dead hand still tried to lend us all its wealth, us, those cheats and rogues for hire, rubble from whom empires rise again. But who held too a prayer with no amen, who hope this aria will never tire or err, that Mozart aria from floor 10. Empires fell down and rose up again. Co-translating with Stanisław was, I was telling Benjamin, when we did Szymborska, it was fun. It was like friendly competition. It was like having awesome tennis matches over the internet. Translating his poetry, I felt like I needed a vacation to Bermuda after every poem. He would rewrite the poem from the Polish original, do a revision, do a variant on it. This is kind of like what Brodsky would do. And then the thing you had to do, this was my initial training as a translator, whatever the form is, you have to keep it. You don't treat the form as a dispensable element and translate it into free verse. In other words, Americanize it, because free verse means different things in different cultural contexts. So we had to go over it and over it and over it, and a friend of mine was just yelling at me for not keeping all of our drafts. I don't want to, because it's like remembrance of long agony. I just don't even want to think about what we went through. And this one was a poem he didn't even want to publish, he and his wife, our mutual friend. When I speak of Stanisław, I'm also talking about the Baranczak School of Translation, of which you have two representatives right here. This is, she cried that night, but not for him to hear, another Villanelle. He didn't even want to, they didn't want to publish it at first because they thought it was too personal, but to me, it's his most beautiful poem. And it's dedicated to Anya, the only one. She cried that night, but not for him to hear. In fact, her crying wasn't why he woke. It was some other sound, that much was clear. And this half-waking shame, no trace of tears all day, and still at night she works to choke the sobs. She cries, but not for him to hear. And all those other nights she lay so near, but he had only caught the breeze's joke, the branch that tapped the roof. That much was clear. The outside dark revolved in its own sphere. No wind, no window pane, no creaking oak had said she's crying, not for you to hear. Untouchable are those tangibly dear. So close they're closed, too far to reach and stroke a quaking shoulder blade. That this much is clear. And he did not reach out for shame, for fear of spoiling the tears' tenderness spoke. Go back to sleep. What woke you isn't here. It was the wind outside, indifferent, clear. And I'm going to give you one final Baranczak poem. I have too many things. I always feel like I'm picking which of all my children are my favorites when I try and prepare these things, and they're all my favorites. But this one, I just want to tell you, we were talking about various forms of translation. The New Yorker published this only after Stanisław's death, and Paul Muldoon was the poetry editor at the time, and Paul Muldoon, this was a version of a Stanisław poem, which means he'd rewritten the original version. Then he and I had worked on it, and then I sent it to Paul Muldoon, and he started collaborating with me back and forth, and it was the closest thing I ever had to kind of working with Stanisław, and Stanisław had wanted to translate Paul Muldoon. It's one of the two of them have the same, phenomenal, I don't know what to call it, intuitive, ingrained sense of poetic form. They can do anything, which can be a problem if you are not one of the people with that sense. But this is a version that went back and forth several times between multiple translators, and this is what finally came out. It's one of his early poems. Plywood. Oh, plywood, second best to the real stuff. Believe me, one day I will say enough to my stooping shoulders, my slouch spine, my slope shape, and your stiff boards will align. And you'll see how my backbone will unbend, that I'll be standing straight until the end of my makeshift but rectilinear prayer, when stiff-backed as a chest of drawers when we shove heavy furniture around. I will rise from the dead, though on what ground, and which I don't know. I'll stand erect, though my vertebrae hierarchic sect won't outlive plywood, no, it just can't win against that vertical eternity, so thin, and yet so sturdy in its ersatz pride, as if the moon had shown me its dark side. I lean, my ear glued to a cupboard's back, and I can hear its hollow and exact hymn to its own cheap immortality. No, wait, I still can straighten, still can be square with this upright world. You knew I could, just as plumb as 4 planks of real wood. The only thing I remember from all the torment on that particular back and forth over so many years involved is Paul Muldoon wanted to introduce different kinds of wood into there. Plywood, of course, because it's PRL, it's people's wool, and then crappy wood is the kind of wood you have, pressboard and plywood. And he started thinking about all other kinds of tree woods that you could use, and this is where having biographical knowledge helps. I said, he didn't know from trees. He didn't do nature. You know, we can't use different names of trees because his wife always used to say, no, Stanisław, no, that is not an aspen. You know, so that was just, you know. Anyhow, so that was that one. I'm going to read a little tiny bit of Ryszard Krynicki, who writes very short poems and who was the first poet I ever translated. And this is also one of the, I feel like I had a freak career. I ended up with Baranczak as my professor. He forced me to collaborate with him because I didn't think I was qualified, because everyone else in my graduate program was saying, no, you can't do that yet. You can't do that yet. No, wait, you know, get a couple PhDs, maybe you can try. And then I went back afterwards. I feel like I take a long time fulfilling my vows, but I always do. I kept meaning to do Ryszard, and my friend Alyssa Vallis did one at the same time, so finally Ryszard Krynicki became anglicized, but I'm just going to read a few from this collection from Northwestern Press. And as I mentioned before, I was so happy. This was the first book I ever published in 1991 that had my name on the cover and everything. I was with my parents in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was driving around. We were living in East Lansing at the time. Driving around, showing them stuff, you know, like trying to pretend like Michigan is really just as exciting as Southern California. So I took them to Ann Arbor. We went in a bookstore, and this was remaindered. And I thought, oh my God, one of my books is remaindered. So anyhow, this is these are a few little poems from Ryszard. This one is called I Can't Help You. He writes a lot of really epigrammatic little poems, but this one, the artist Jenny Holzer projected in Italian translation and English translation and Polish on a wall in Italy. And I love it. It's called I Can't Help You. Poor moth, I can't help you. I can only turn out the light. This one is called Suddenly. And the little girl who's in there, this is again biographical knowledge, is now a renowned specialist in Yiddish, from whom Benjamin has taken classes in Yiddish. This is a poem when she was a little girl. My little girl, my great teacher, who nobly forgives me my errors, since she knows already that even spelling rules change, shouts in triumph from her room, the mantis devours its mate only in human captivity. And Natalia is also an amateur botanist and zoologist too. She knows I used to pick up words from her. And there, let's see. Okay, here's one that I really love because it came from another dissident poet who suffered because of his dissidence in People's Poland. Do not want to die for us, and I assume he's talking to his fellow poets and to the would-be martyrs of Poland. Do not want to die for us. Do not want to live for us. Live with us. Okay, and then I'm going to end with Adam in just a minute, but I'm doing, you guys are my first trial run. These are with Michał Rusinek of Mironbiawski, whom we tried in vain to publish many years ago. They came out in Cross Currents, some of Stanisław's and my translations. His executor, Białaszewski's executor, hated Baranczak, wouldn't give us the rights, and threatened to sue over Cross Currents. And oh yeah, we must have made, what, 47 cents off of that? Yeah, be my guest. But his current executor is a much kinder person who also worships Baranczak, and the only reason he gave me permission to work on them with my friend is because he loved Baranczak. He said, if you're good enough for Baranczak, okay. So, okay, good. Okay, this is Białaszewski, and this, I like this. Białaszewski does cosmic odes to household utensils, which I think is an awesome thing to do. This is called Gray Eminences of Rapture. Oh, how I rejoice that you are sky and kaleidoscope, that you have so many artificial stars, that you glow in a monstrance of brightness when I place your perforated half-globe over my eyes under the air. How unstrained in abundance, O colander spoon. The stove, too, is beautiful. It has tiles and chinks. It may be grizzled, silver, gray, even drowsy, but especially when it shuffles its glints, or as it sets, and through the whole rhythm of its imperfections, whitely poured in charred bells, it flows into elements of monumental bedding. Translating Białaszewski, I know so much more about his bed than I ever needed to know. He wrote a lot of his poetry in his bed turns into a biblical landscape, his bed turns into all kinds of things, and I keep having to figure out, okay, is he lying on one side with an elbow against the wall? You know, trying to figure out what contortion he's in. This is another object poem, and it reminds me of the Testament poem that you brought up, Joanna. Secret freedom. They bequeathed each other walls like the plasma of life. In their family, they tended great-grand wardrobes, great-grand doorknobs. When the scrolls of staircases unfurled, when the house went down, they felt. The wardrobe lingered in their little liver. They almost thought, the cupboard exists in its utterance. Just a squawk of the mouth is enough. The door laughs. Through a landscape split into synthesis, they proceeded toward the promised floor, which promised each unto himself. They did not sing Ecclesiastes. Vanity is for the chosen are few, since each chooses himself. And I'll just do one more object poem here. Oh, two more. Do you mind if I do two more? And then I'll do Zagajewski. I've never done them before, so this for me is fun. I know, I'm keeping my eye here. This is called Study of a Key. The key has the smell of eau de nail and taste of electricity, and like a fruit, it is bitter, unripe, consisting entirely of pit. And the final one, another object poem, Self-Verified. A chair stands, article of truth, sculpture of itself, tied into one knot, reality's abstraction. It broke. That's a form too. Yes, candelabra. Yes, bull's face. A chair's abstract calling now summons whole crowds of reality, ties them in one knot inside the storeroom of truth, reality's abstraction. This is someone, if you haven't read it, you should. It's just come out from New York Review of Books. It was initially published by Northwestern. That's Madeleine Levin's brilliant revised translation of Memoir of the Warsaw Uprising. It's about another world, and again, I'm thinking of the Testament poem, in which objects are infinitely malleable, and investing yourself in your surrounding world means investing yourself in endless danger, and the need to translate a broken chair into an abstract ideal of the chair. This is the world where things get broken and taken away all the time. Okay, I'm not going to read a lot of Szymborska, partly because I feel like we have a surplus of Szymborska in the room. Whoops, I didn't mean to throw your equipment around. But I'm just going to read a couple of Szymborska poems. One of them, it's another one that comes to my mind a lot these days, alongside one of Adam's poems that I'll read next to it. It's called Some People. And this is me and Stanisław translating. The Białaszewski is me and Michał Ruszynek. Some people flee some other people in some country under a sun and some clouds. They abandon something close to all they've got. Sown fields, some chickens, dogs, mirrors in which fire now preens. Their shoulders bear pitchers and bundles. The emptier they get, the heavier they grow. What happens quietly? Someone's dropping from exhaustion. What happens loudly? Someone's bread is ripped away. Someone tries to shake a limp child back to life. Always another wrong road ahead of them. Always another wrong bridge across an oddly reddish river. Around them, some gunshots, now nearer, now farther away. Above them, a plane seems to circle. Some invisibility would come in handy. Some grayish stoniness, or better yet, some non-existence for a shorter or a longer while. Something else will happen, only where or what. Someone will come at them, only when or who, in how many shapes, with what intentions. If he has a choice, maybe he won't be the enemy, and will let them live some sort of life. And this is kind of a pair poem that one of the earliest ones. I started translating Adam in the summer of 1995. Should I tell my Adam story? Because this is, again, I've spent my life feeling phenomenally unqualified. The good thing about getting to a certain age is you just get used to it. You just say, oh, hell, what are they going to do to me now, So Adam, I'd been translating with Stanisław, and through an intermediary, Adam Zagajewski, of whom I was profoundly in awe. I'd heard him at one of his first American poetry readings in Boylston Hall at Harvard University, and he read his poem To Go to Vif now, I suppose. Fantastic poem, you should look it up if you don't know it. And it completely blew me away. He read it in Polish and English. I went over to the library, I found his other books, I read them all. So he was like, that's Adam Zagajewski. I mean, Baranczyk I was used to, he's a great poet, but I also go over to his house and eat, but Adam Zagajewski, And anyhow, he contacted me through a mutual acquaintance to ask if I would want to translate him. And I just freaked out for two reasons. One is because I thought, I only translate with Stanisław, I have to translate with Stanisław, that's just what I do. And the other thing is I thought, my God, it's Adam Zagajewski. I feel like a garage band getting asked to open for the Stones. And so I said no, and I got off the phone, and I told my husband what I'd done, and he said, he has no intonation. He said, you're an idiot. And the next thing he said is, it's translating, not sex. You can do it with more than one person. So I called Adam back, and it turned out he'd been intimidated by me, which I was like, holy, because he'd read my book on I wrote a book on Mandelstam, and he loves Mandelstam, and he thought I was like some, big fancy scholar who would turn him down because he wasn't Mandelstam, and it's like, oh my God, I intimidated Adam Zagajewski, Anyhow, I was translating these poems, 1995, from this collection, Mysticism for Beginners, and I've just been in love with Adam's poetry since forever, and I'm going to miss getting emails with poems saying, can you please translate it by Saturday? I have a reading. Refugees, bent under burdens which sometimes can be seen and sometimes can't. They trudge through mud or desert sands, hunched, hungry, silent men in heavy jackets, dressed for all four seasons. Old women with crumpled faces, clutching something, a child, the family lamp, the last loaf of bread. It could be Bosnia today, Poland in September 39, France 8 months later, Germany in 45, Somalia, Afghanistan, Egypt. There's always a wagon, or at least a wheelbarrow full of treasures, a quilt, a silver cup, the fading scent of home, a car out of gas marooned in a ditch, a horse soon left behind, snow, a lot of snow, too much sun, too much rain, and always that special slouch, as if leaning toward another better planet, with less ambitious generals, less snow, less wind, fewer cannons, less history. Alas, there's no such planet, just that slouch. Shuffling their feet, they move slowly, very slowly, toward the country of nowhere and the city of no one on the river of never. And how much time should I?
A lot more.
A lot more?
I would
Well,
love a lot more, but I think we have time for a little more.
A little more. Okay, yeah, I wasn't going to read a lot more. Don't worry, I just don't want to overdo it. I'm going to read one more poem from Szymborska that also, I mean, I'm sure other people are having this experience too. Things that you knew before what's happened in the last month sound different. And one of the things Szymborska always writes about is how much of the world that we see as real, we in fact have made up. And then we take it as sacrosanct because we made it up and that's the way it must be. And this was the last poem from her last collection, which I don't believe was actually finished. The Polish edition has these beautiful meticulous notes by her editor, Ryszard Krynicki and Krystyna Krynicka, talking about little poems she'd started on matchbooks. And I love Ryszard Krynicki, besides being a brilliant poet, is a brilliant editor, and he and his wife run a publishing house. And he meticulously notes, he's never heard the phrase material culture, I'm sure, but the scrap of paper, I'll give you an example out of the book, because he has one poem about Zbigniew Herbert's. He edited all of Zbigniew Herbert really meticulously, and Alyssa followed this edition in her translations of Herbert. But this is what he catalogs in his footnotes to the editions, which I love. This is a little poem called Frail Manuscripts from when he was editing Zbigniew Herbert. The old poet's frail manuscripts bear traces of ash, countless cigarette holes, coffee stains, less often red wine, and now and then the almost unintelligible prints of cat paws vanishing into space-time. So he did that kind of note for all of Szymborska's fragments, which I just can't translate them. She didn't like having anything that she hadn't okayed published, and she actually sent out all of her various translators in different languages. She sent out through Michał Ruszynek, she never learned to use internet, manuscript poems that were going into this last collection. And then she said, she wrote back almost immediately, or he wrote back for her and said, destroy poem X, there's a new version. And the scholar in me was appalled, but I did it just right away. I felt like she said it, she gets it. It's not this poem. The poem I'm going to read as my last Szymborska poem here, and then I'm going to read a few more of the most recent collection of Adam Zagajewski's, which is coming out either late this year or early in 2023. And again, I didn't know it was the last collection. I would have translated faster because he loved getting his stuff translated, and I was always, am perpetually always behind. Anyhow, map. This is Szymborska. Flat as the table it's placed on. Nothing moves beneath it, and it seeks no outlet. Above, my human breath creates no stirring air and leaves its total surface undisturbed. Its plains, valleys are always green. Uplands, mountains are yellow and brown. why seas, oceans remain a kindly blue beside the tattered shores. Everything here is small, near, accessible. I can press volcanoes with my fingertip, stroke the poles without thick mittens. I can, with a single glance, encompass every desert, with the river lying just beside it. A few trees stand for ancient forests. You couldn't lose your way in them. In the east and west, above and below the equator, quiet like pins dropping, and in every black pinprick, people keep on living. Mass graves and sudden ruins are out of the picture. Nations' borders are barely visible, as if they wavered to be or not. I like maps because they lie, because they give no access to the vicious truth, because great-heartedly, good-naturedly, they spread before me a world not of this world. And I'll read a couple more Zagajewskis here in just a minute, but I want to, this is something, anyone who translates knows this feeling, something that takes you months, and everybody, if it comes out okay, everybody says, yeah, of course. There was a line, and one of her Spanish translators had exactly the same experience. I was translating this, I was saying, okay, this is kind of working. Okay, I'm kind of getting this. Stanisław was no longer well enough to do any work with me then. It was quiet like pins dropping, which in Polish, I believe is cisza jak makiem zaszło. Am I getting it right? Which, at first I get to it, it means quiet as if he, and we don't know who he is, had sown poppy seeds. So I first get to the line and go, what? Quiet as if some unknown he has been sowing poppy seeds? I don't think so, as if he's sown poppy seeds. So I figured it had to be an idiom, so I looked up in my dictionaries. I still do the old-fashioned thing and flip open the books. I check online after I've flipped open the books. And I was going, okay, I need a quiet idiom. But in the next one, you have every black pinprick. Those are the dots that show where cities are on the map. So I thought, okay, I have to get a quiet idiom that leaves little dots, So I would just go around for a while. It's not like I worked on the poem for 6 months. It's just that I put it down and would go around, just like over and over. And finally, I figured out quiet like pins dropping. And now it just feels like fine. And I get the population points. And nobody knows that 6 months of my life, I was doing tons of other stuff. I wasn't really, but nobody will ever know. So now you know, you'll forget about it, and I will be crestfallen. But that's not the issue. Anyhow, these are from Adam's last collection. And I won't read all of them. I had a horrible time picking. This one, again, speaks, if anything, too much to the moment. It's called Border. And the epigraph is from Vladimir Holan, The Scent of Gasoline Crickets. Poor people wait by the border and look hopefully at the other side. The scent of gasoline, crickets, skylarks sing, the abridged version of a hymn. Both sides of the border face east. The north is east, and the south is east. One car holds a giant globe, showing only oceans. A little girl in an ancient Fiat 125 carefully does homework in a green-ruled notebook. There are borders everywhere. And one more? Okay, I'll do one more. I won't do the long ones then. I want to do one. This one, I was happy this came out. In the New York, oh, drat. They're all double-sided. If I didn't, yes, got it. Okay, I was going to, as my French friend always says, I will suicide myself if I do not have it. This one came out in the New Yorker, and I just want to switch gears to go into the ending. People in Poland always, there's the cliche of Adam is he's like this highbrow, effete aesthete who deals only in lofty, otherworldly topics, and a terrible snob, which just shows how wrong people in Poland can be. And this poem is called Boogie Woogie. You shout from the other room. You ask me how to spell Boogie Woogie. And instantly I think, what luck. No war has been declared. No fire has consumed our city's monuments, our bodies, our dwellings. The river didn't flood. No friends have been arrested. It's only Boogie Woogie. I sigh, relieved, and say it's spelled just like it sounds, Boogie Woogie. Thank you. Oh, yeah, sure. And this isn't contagious, it's seasonal allergies. You can tell spring is coming.
Thank you so much. We do have time for just a few questions or comments, if anyone happens to have them. And the computer I was using to monitor the Zoom call has decided it's had enough. So, but if Liz sees any questions from Zoom, she can feed those to us as well. Does anyone have anything that they wish to ask?
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm teaching a graduate seminar this semester on translation of poetry, and we were just starting a conversation about collaborative translation. And you mentioned in so many different ways how you collaborate with others on translating. And could you expand on that a little bit more in terms of how we talked about a different understanding of authorship, different way of understanding how to make choices, but are there particular critics or theorists who kind of think about collaboration in ways that correspond to your practice, or do you just see these as totally different worlds?
To me, that's totally different worlds, I'm afraid. I started translating when I was seriously translating when I was still a graduate student, and Stanisław was already a really acclaimed translator into Polish, and I had the upper hand in English. His English was really good, but I had the trump card. I can't even use that expression anymore. I had the upper hand on that, and he obviously had the upper hand on things Polish. But I feel like I learned by working it through, and I think it was something that Joanna said about you have to take each poem, figure out how this poem works. There's a book that came out in the last year or so by the critic Stephanie Burt called Don't Read Poetry, Read Poems. And I think that's exactly it. Don't translate poetry, translate poems. So I just was collaborating from day one, and Stanisław had the same, he went back after the fall of the Eastern Bloc. He was invited back to lecture at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan. And he said he was terrified because suddenly he had to come up with a theory of how he translated, and he'd never done it before. So he came up with this notion called the semantic dominant, which he just invented it because he needed to give a lecture. But but I understand it completely. You figure out what you cannot afford to lose and still keep that poem. There are things that you cannot let go. If it's comic, if you lose comic, what's the point of the poem? It's basically saying literal translation is a crib, not a poem. And what makes a poem is exactly what in it resists purely literal definition. You have to know the literal meaning in order to know how the literal meaning is shifted in the poem and what directions it shifts. So that's really it. And collaborating with Stanisław was really formative, and that's why I was terrified of working with Adam. Adam was not a collaborative poet. He was on to the next poem, and he was working on a new collection when he died. And I'll never know how he revised them. That's what kills me is I'd get the first version over email and I'd translate it, and if he didn't warn me, he would have changed it by the book version. And it was always really interesting. Like suddenly there's a stanza break there wasn't there before, or suddenly a comma's gone missing, his punctuation changed. And it brings out the obsessive compulsive disorder in me. I just like, oh my God, has he ever used a semicolon like that before? So, but he didn't go over them afterwards and check them. I had to force him to check them. Now I'm a bit worried. I just finished my first collection without Adam around, to where I have to, say, I'm not going to translate anything new until you look at what I've already done. But translation theory, I feel like it's multiple different things. You just read as much as you can of a bunch of different things you're interested in, including a lot of poetry, and then you translate the poem, which is something different, and everything you've read will somehow inform it or shape what you're doing. But translation theory, I read it and I feel like, usually I don't feel like I know what it has to do with what I do. And the other thing is just pragmatic, is I have a limited amount of time, and would I rather read a volume on translation theory or get on to the next poem? And for me, that's like no-brainer. So, Joanna, did you?
Well, I think part of the problem is that translation theory kind of privileges the product over the process, and for translators, the whole process is extremely important. And I wanted to ask you, because for me, it is extremely important, the starting point for translation is actually a reading, arriving at a very kind of my own reading of a poem. I never look at literary criticism, I just sort of commune with the poem. How was it possible to do when you were translating together with Baranchak, who had such a strong personality and such strong ways of reading?
Because I have a strong personality too, and I felt like it's coming out in English with my name on it. If I don't see it, if it doesn't work for me, then, I'm sorry. And he was fine with that, and we used to really, it was always friendly, relatively friendly, well, no, always very friendly, but we would butt heads and go back and forth on things over and over and over again, because I felt like if it makes me wince, I don't want my name connected to it. And he kind of felt the same way, so that in a way that means you can kind of work together that way. But I feel exactly, I don't read others' translations, he got into that side of things. I'm going to read everybody who translated Wallace Stevens into Polish and show why mine is better. And come on, you already got the prize, just, I don't read the other people's translations. I don't read the criticism. I have to find my way into it first, and then I can read something and maybe it will shift the way I saw it. But if I don't, maybe you have the same, I remember Helen Wendler was really shocked when Adam and I were talking, and I said, I don't always read the poem to the end when I start translating, because it's working through the poem. I have to get through the poem and get into it somehow. The same way as when I have several failed artistic endeavors behind me, including acting and music, and I would, I didn't say, oh, I'm going to study Macbeth. I'd say, I'm a witch. I'm going to read the witch's part. I'm going to start working on the witch's part, and then I'll go back, and the whole play is really about, witch number 2. So I would do that, or if I was doing piano, I didn't say I'm going to read through all of Chopin's waltzes before I play a Chopin waltz. You start playing and you work it out, and then maybe you listen to someone else do it and get depressed because your way was obviously inferior. But that to me is the only way I can do it. It's a practice. It's not a product. This is,
Helen Wendler herself, this is what, for me, her reading of Herbert was so powerful because she interrogates every choice, of poet's choice. So I'm surprised that she would be surprised, because as a critic, she gets into the very fabric of a poem and says, well, why not this word? Why this word?
yeah, which is a really useful technique, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but that's
Yeah, no, but she kind of, I just saw her kind of gasp. And I said, I do my 5-finger exercises all the time. I just read a lot of poetry, I read a lot of stuff, and then once I get to the poem, it's me and the poem, And when you do a lot of one poem, which is what I like to do, I've only really worked on a few. I've been doing this since the 80s, and I really only have about 5 poets I've translated. That's it. That's what I do. And once you get to the poem, that's it. That's what you do.
So
So Russell, Scott Valentino sent over Zoom, sent a question that relates to this. He was asking whether when you're working on a poem, if you cast around deliberately or unconsciously for things that sound similar to you, like targets that you're going to try to match, and what similar would mean in that? I mean, what is similarity when you're trying to figure out what a poem is supposed to sound like?
Well, if I do it unconsciously, by definition, I don't know I'm doing it. So,
I
yeah.
added the unconsciously, that was me, that's not Russell.
But consciously, it's funny because now it's a little different, but what I always felt like is, it's again reading. I just read stuff out loud to myself over and over again, and it really helps me. I know how Adam read. I know his voice really well, and I know how Szymborska read. I know how Stanisław read. He had a horrible, the worst diction in the world, about which he writes poems about the advantages of having bad diction. I know how Ryszard Krynicki sounds, and trying to like channel the voice or something, or if I don't know the poet, Białaszewski, I have recordings, I never knew him. I try and figure out what the voice is, and of course it's coming through me, and of course it's, what Jesse was talking about, there's a distortion. I'm all I've got, it's gonna come through me, and some reason the words sound better this way than that way, and I can't figure out why. And sometimes afterwards I can go back and say, I was doing assonance, son of a gun, but at the time I'm just saying, oh gosh, I really didn't want an iamb there. That's what was bugging me so much. And some of them I still don't know why, they just sound better. There's a really untheoretical principle in translating that's it sounds better principle, and I have no way to justify it intellectually or critically or as a scholar.
Thank you so much again for sharing your translations and also for just the richness of all those stories as well too, about how they came to be. My question was I was thinking about how you said, that wonderful moment in graduate school where, your mentor said, why not? Why not? And I guess my question is, over the course of your career working with similar poets, working with the same set of poets, I should say, but also just over time, growing in experience as a translator, were there certain lessons that you learned that sort of changed your strategies as a translator? And if so, what prompted that? And if not, how did you understand your own evolution from that why not moment, beginning as an apprentice to now?
Well, I don't know. I get nervous even saying I've gotten better. I must have. If I haven't, it's pretty sad. But there's some really specific things I had to learn, and this may speak to what you're talking about, because Stanisław, as I said, it was like Brodsky. He has this incredible facility. For him, I remember going to the beach with him and Anya, and he would sit at the beach. He couldn't relax if he wasn't playing word games. And I kept feeling, oh God, I don't want to make another Clara Hugh. I never even knew what a Clara Hugh was till I met him. And here I am at the damn beach. I have to come, and I'd feel like I had to stay in the game. My family used to make bad puns in the car. That I can handle, but these complicated, he just did it. It was second nature to him. And it's not to me. And I had to figure out a way into doing rhyme poetry that wasn't at all like him, especially with Szymborska, when Stanisław was no longer able to help me, and I went back and did some of the rhymed poems. What I had to do, here it is. There's one, I'm not going to read it all, but called The Old Turtle's Dream. And it's kind of comic. So, I felt like, comic I kind of get. And it's carefully rhymed, but I also check and see if they're doing slant rhymes. I feel like, okay, I'm good. I can do a slant rhyme too. I check and see what kind of rhymes they're doing. And then it takes me forever because I'll do I do lots of just filler, say, okay, these two lines seem good. These two lines are crap, but they're holding the place until I come up with something better. I got a few more lines in stanza 3. leave it, and then just come back every single day. It takes me really a long time. Can I just read a little tiny bit of this? Because I was really proud of it, because one reviewer who didn't know which ones I did by myself and which ones Stanisław did cited a thing from here, and it rhymed and meter, and I did it without Stanisław. I just, yay. The old turtle dreams about a lettuce leaf, when by that leaf the emperor appears. The century hasn't changed him in the least. To the turtle, it's an ordinary affair. The emperor appears in part, at any rate. The sun reflects on black shoes right below two shapely calves in stockings, spotless white. To the turtle, this is just the status quo. 2 legs paused en route from Austerlitz to Jena. Above them, clouds where thunderous laughter roars. You may doubt the scene in all its splendor, and if that well-shod foot could be the emperor's. It's hard to recognize someone from snippets, from the left foot only or the right. The turtle doesn't know what he has witnessed. His childhood memories are slight. Emperor or not, how does it alter the mystery of what the turtle sees? The void has briefly yielded up a stranger who flickers back to life from heels to knees. And it's classic Szymborska in the sense that history is how we see it. A turtle would have lived long enough to have seen Napoleon. The turtle might have seen Napoleon. The turtle doesn't know from Napoleon. The turtle sees whatever, the lettuce leaf. And we're the ones who say, oh my gosh, this tree goes back to the days of Christ. The tree doesn't go back to the days of the Christ. It's just no. So she's kind of turning, but she's also doing it comically. And that, it took me a long, I just had to do it in little pieces and keep going back and say, okay, it sucks, but it'll hold the place until something better comes along. Okay. So this is why when I first started working with Adam, the first question I asked him, I knew he didn't rhyme so far. I said, have you started rhyming? And he said, no. So I said, oh, okay, good. It's hard. I don't know. Some people find it easier. I think you have the kind of, like for me, it's not fun. It's work, I can do it, but it's not, yeah. So that was one really concrete way where I figured out a system that worked for me. I couldn't do it with Stanisław, so.
Well, I think that might be where we land then. Although, Claire, honestly, what the critic did to you by sort of like, it was citing that I did the same thing in a sense to Stanisław once, because after the Feroz Strasbourg published Jan Kochanowski's Laments in an absolute, a stunningly brilliant translation.
Incredible, yeah.
By Seamus Heaney and Stanisław Baranczak.
Yeah.
So I asked Seamus Heaney how they came up with all these brilliant rhymes in this gorgeous rhythm, translating Renaissance Polish poetry into English that sounds like Renaissance English poetry. I was certain that the Irish poet came up with all of that stuff. He said, I didn't do any of that. Stanisław came up with all those rhymes.
The person to ask about that, though, is Magda Hedel, who just gave a talk about this at Harvard I zoomed in on. And that was Seamus being modest, because I remember there was one point I knew that it was Seamus Heaney because it had the green corn is mowed, and I thought it was beautiful, and it's not in the original, and it involved nature. So I just pegged that as Seamus Heaney, and I was right on that one. So she knows all, she's looked at all the manuscripts, she looked at Helen Wendler's manuscript, she's looked at everything. It was a real back and forth, and there was a lot of times, she said, and she showed it in her talk, where Stanisław came up with a super clever rhyme that was just too clever by half, and Heaney just, nope, it's out. So, yeah, it was a real heavy-duty, apparent collaboration.
Well, thank you very much for sharing the products of your collaborations as well as your own work, and thank you everyone who was able to join us in person and on Zoom over the course of this long day. Although it didn't feel very long to me at all, just this was pure pleasure. So thank you so much, Claire, and thank you everyone for joining us. So, so that concludes our day's events, Building Bridges Over Walls. This reading, as well as all of the other talks, sessions that we've held since 10 o'clock this morning, will be archived as video recordings on the Crease website. We invite you to share that, as well as to visit the visual history, the online exhibit that we put together documenting some of the networks and connections between authors, publishers, editors, and translators in the upper Midwest, sustaining this literature since the 1960s, if not earlier, and continuing to the present day. We expect that in the not distant future, we will probably do, we will be expanding that visual exhibit into additional versions and editions. So if people in cyberspace have comments or things that they wish for us to highlight, you can certainly send us an email. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely weekend.